Have you ever heard of a chest of jigs? It's kind of like a chest of drawers, but it's full of jigs. No, nor have I. There's got to be a reason for that. Either someone hasn't thought of it or it doesn't work. I made 5 jigs and I need somewhere for them to live. Because like anything in a small workshop, if you don't have a place for it, it's going to end up on the floor, against a wall or in your way. I've got no guarantee that this is actually going to work and it's going to be an efficient use of space, but what I am going to guarantee is it's not going to be expensive, it's going to be flexible, and anybody can do it. The inspiration actually came from a build a while ago. I made this chest of drawers a few years ago and it has been brilliant. No wasted space, no hardware, cheap plywood and a little bit of hardwood edge banding. That's to hide the mistakes. But for now, we don't need drawers. Well, not this many anyway. We need space for these 5 relatively thin jigs, each one set on 18mm ply. So let's get started. First thing you'll need to do if you're copying this build is to ensure that you have some space free at either end of your jigs, at least 20mm each end. You'll see why really shortly. The wood for the cabinet is already cut down to the rough size. For ease, the cabinet will be 1224mm high. This is the width of a standard plywood sheet and will save us a cut. And more importantly, it'll ensure that without any effort, my cabinets are all the same height. As you can see, I've made a very clear plan, but obviously I've got to add where the jigs go. Lovely. Now to hang it somewhere so I can clearly see it and refer to it. Idiot. Okay, I guess we're balancing it somewhere instead. Now, I'm no expert, as I say in pretty much every video I do. But if you're following along, this is the method I'd use to make just about any cabinet within the workshop. It's not the official standard, but they work and it's not complicated. Once I have the sides, top and bottom and a few braces cut to size, I'm going to start with the dry fit. I'm not a woodworker who can use SketchUp to make detailed plans before a build. I need to physically see exactly what I'm doing and make decisions along the way. It's really important to adapt to a way that works for you. We're all different in and out of the workshop, so just be you. So I clamp everything together and then I can lay out the braces, bring in all the jigs, position them where I want them to live, and then I can see where they need supporting and how to attach that support to the frame. This bit's up to you, but my cabinet's not going to have any back, so the braces are going to be vital to stop it racking from side to side, but they're also going to provide support for some of the shelves. Once you're happy, then you can place where you want your joinery. For me, that's going to be pocket hole screws, and where possible, they're going to be hidden like the underside of the base or the top. Don't forget to label your parts as well. For those of you that are worried about pocket hole screws in this application, I'm going to be supporting it with wood glue as well for the major joints, so I'm really not worried too much about the strength. If you decide not to opt for the pocket hole screws, you could simply screw through from the outside or just cut rebates and dados to house the horizontal pieces. Take the route that suits your skills. In the end, it's better to be able to make something and enjoy that than to struggle and possibly fail following someone else's rules. And I happen to particularly like this Craig jig. I'll pop a link to it in the description if you want to check it out. My favourite bit is that I can drill all of my holes within a matter of minutes. And to be honest, that is the main reason I use them in these types of builds, and this particular jig does leave a really nice finish. There are a couple of simple rules that I follow when using pocket holes, just to help the build go well. Number 1, and probably the most important, is to clamp the joint in a way that the screws cannot drag the wood out of position when you drive them home. You can always check for square and measure the pieces into place, but a better way is just a few well-placed spacers. Makes it far easier and it's much more reliable. Ensure that the screws are the correct length, and as I said before, take your time to place them where they're less likely to be seen. Oh yes, and plan your build to go in the right order. So where possible, you always have room to reach in with the pocket hole bit. The pocket hole attachments are far longer than your average drill bits. This is to enable you to drive the screw in at such an acute angle, but it does mean you need a fair amount of space. I tend to throw a few screws into the sides of the braces just to give a little bit of extra hole while the glue cures. Due to the speed of the process, you could expect to have the carcass put together in a matter of hours. But if it takes longer, that's okay too. Now this part. This is suddenly where trying to film this build in such a small space becomes a little bit more tricky. You're about to see way too many shots of the back of my bald head. But the details of the build are still in there. As you saw at the start, the jigs are going to be held in place by a series of shelves, and if you're going to attempt this, I'd suggest that you make your jigs, where possible, a uniform size, because this is going to help greatly. And this is a great tip. If you're laying out the pieces and struggling to hold the shelves in place, simply balance them on a few well-placed clamps, rather than trying to actually clamp them to the side itself. It's far less fiddly overall. You'll see at this stage that none of this is getting glued in, only screws. Strength is not an issue here, but also there are other reasons that will become clear later on. Anyone who has done this kind of build before can relate to the impossible spot. This is that one spot where you just can't get a drill in to drive that screw home. We've all been there. And that's where this handy right angle drill attachment has got me out of trouble more times than I can remember. I know I do this a lot, but it was the second most popular recommendation on the channel last year. I'll pop a link in the description. I don't say this nearly enough, but if you're one of the huge amount of people who checks out the links that I do put in there and the tool recommendations, or goes to my site and looks through the tools and the reviews, just know that I am genuinely, truly grateful. I know I often sound like a salesperson touting for business, but honestly, I don't link anything that I wouldn't use myself. So thank you. On with the build. With the jigs all housed, the next step is to create a simple vertical draw runner of sorts. This is one of those parts that's easier for me to show you rather than trying to explain, but here are a couple of basic bits of advice. Take a long batten and sand it all before you cut it into smaller lengths. It's going to make your life so much easier than sanding each individual part. Then take a look at the hardware on your jigs, as this is the true width that is needed per jig, not just the width of the 18mm ply on which it's mounted. The battens themselves don't need to be this width, but they do need to hold the jigs apart by this distance, and so space them carefully. And arrange your jigs as close together as possible, overlapping where possible. I've cut some acute angles to help feed the jigs in smoothly and countersunk 2 screw holes, so there's no need for wood glue. And now for a great tip, and something you're going to see throughout the build. CA glue and activator. Honestly, it is not just a gimmick. As some of the battens are on the top and gravity is doing what gravity does, one bead of CA glue and a spray of the activator holds them in place so that I've got both hands free to fix the screw. The instant hold of the CA glue and activator is absolutely priceless here and later. You don't have to be 100% accurate so long as the fit is not too tight. Then give it all a good test. And note, there is still time to change or adapt anything if it's not right. So there's a time in every project where a little bit of self-doubt comes into it, especially if you've planned it, well, like I have. My only advice to you in this sort of a situation is what I've just done. Take a step back, clean the workshop around what you've made, have a fresh start the next day, and take a look at what you've done. We put all of these little battens in to keep everything aligned. It's not neat. This is workshop furniture. I'm gonna smarten it up in a little while, but it's not important. Where the self-doubt comes in, well, let me show you. There's room here for the jointing jig. Then we've got the 2 smaller jigs. I had a little bit of space, so this is my flattening tile. And then there's the table saw sled. So that's 5 jigs. We've got room for another 2 of the longest ones. And then we've got these 2 unused bits of space here. Well, what I'm asking myself is this an efficient use? Was I better off leaving the jigs leaning against the wall? This is quite a big chest of drawers for a small workshop. One reason we didn't glue any of the internal parts is you can make this into another chest of drawers just by taking all of the internals out, putting battens on the side and making some drawers to slide onto them, much like the old design. Time for the simplest drawer design I have ever done. They're strong, they're cheap, and they're easy. Loads and loads of margin for error too, which is nice. There's only one part that needs to be 95% accurate, and that is the base. The rest is incredibly flexible within certain tolerances. You'll need a base cut to the size of the space minus around 2mm each side. Sides and back are joined with simple butt joints, and the front will be placed on last. The drawer sides need to be a minimum distance from the base edge of the thickness of 12mm ply sheet. And to join it together, we return to the CA activated trick. The CA glue is for instant hold and the wood glue is for strength over time. But don't worry, we will reinforce these all later. The order of construction with this is not vital, but I find that putting the sides together first gives me the best results. I use my workbench to ensure that they are horizontally square, and then I mark the minimum distance that they need to be from the edge of the base, and then set the front flush. Then everything can be glued to the base. I'm using clamps here, but they're not vital, especially as I tend to put screws up through the base into the sides. I do this once the glue is cured, but you do you. And now for the flexibility. Take this drawer for instance. You can build the sides and the back anywhere within this space. It doesn't even have to be square, so long as it all meets. The reason for this is because the fit is entirely dictated by the base. So as long as that's square and cut to the right dimensions, the drawer will function perfectly. No drawer slides here, which means not only a saving, but also a far better use of space. Not to mention, no mistakes from trying to fit the slides. My runners are just 12mm squared battens with one side sanded smooth, as this is what the drawer's going to slide on. Quick tip, If your drawer runners are not sliding smoothly enough, candle wax. My aim here is for the drawers to finish flush, so I just mark the thickness of a 12mm ply and set the slides back this far, because they're also going to act as stops so the drawers don't slide in too deep. You'll need 2 battens for each side of the drawer, and these need to be spaced so that they don't pinch. For that, I covered a batten with around 6 layers of painter's tape to make it slightly thicker, and then this sits as a guide while the upper batten is placed on top of it. Due to the CA and activator setting immediately, always position the front first to your line and then tilt the batten in. That should save you any mistakes. Another way that I like to build, and you may have noticed it already, I'm taking measurements from the piece itself. As I said at the start, I'm not a builder who can work to detailed plans before the event. I need to work my way through taking the measurements from the previous step. And believe it or not, I generally find that that actually minimises my errors. But don't worry, there's always mistakes to be had, and I'll show you each and every one of them at the end. One of the measurements taken in situ is the position of the drawer fronts. I like to place them on the drawer, clamp the whole drawer together and then trace the cut location. I don't think that just gluing the front on is enough here. So I'm going to cut rebates and dados and sneak up on the perfect fit this way. That just gives a lot more surface to surface glue area on the drawer front itself. This is also a good time to pop a few screws into the sides of the drawers just for a little added strength. The runners from the top drawer are measured from the bottom drawer's location and attached in exactly the same way as the first. Another drawer tip: if you plan to remove the drawer entirely, then it's worth cutting the little corner off the back of the base, so when you return the drawer to its position, it's much easier to find the location. And I mentioned sneaking up on the fit for the drawer fronts. For this design, I'm cutting rebates and dados, as I said, to house the drawer sides and base. Multiple cuts on the table saw with the blade raised just to half the thickness of the ply will leave you able to sneak up on the perfect fit. It's an easy process, but take it slow and take it steady. Each time you move the fence, you can line it up with the edge of your last cut. This minimises the amount of cuts you need to make. You can have a scrap piece of ply to test. A little wobble here is fine, as that leaves room for the glue, not too much though. You could use a router, and you probably get a smarter finish here because you could stop the dados where you need to stop them and not have them running all the way through the drawer front. But I'm happy because you can't see any of this from the front. Remember that if your drawer fronts are much thinner than they are long, then they should be done on a mitre gauge or a crosscut sled, as this gives you far better support. And as the lines are actually traced with a pencil running around the edges of the drawer sides, you don't want to remove any part of that pencil line. Just sneak up on it. If for the top ones you struggle to get a clamp in to hold the drawer together to be marked, try a few blobs of CA glue. As long as you don't use too much, it'll come apart pretty easily once you've done your marking. And this bit's important. For the thinner drawers, I don't recommend running this over the table saw freehand. This is the perfect time to use your mitre gauge, or if you have one, a crosscut sled. That way the piece is supported in all the right places. And if you find your rebate goes all the way to the edge of the piece, then you may need to set up a sacrificial fence to save your table saw fence from hitting the blade. I clamp the fronts on because I know how often I remove the drawers and hold them by the front itself. Clamps will give you the tightest joint here. So here's something that's a bit difficult. On one hand, I've been saying, don't worry about the look of this piece, it's just shop furniture. And then in the next section, I'm about to say your accent pieces should all match. But just know that the choice is entirely yours. What comes next is really because I film within my workshop, and a nice backdrop makes the videos look a little bit better. If you want to glue knobs and screw handles on your drawers, follow your heart. I decided to match the handles on my last build for continuity. So I just ran a piece of sapele through my router table with a mixture of roundovers and coving bits, experimenting until I got a shape that matched the previous ones. When I was happy, I just cut it down to lengths and gave them a sand. The drawer handles will also match the hardwood sapele edge battens that I'm using to cover the exposed edge grain of the ply. And this is the rabbit hole I went down. Nothing was uniform, these were all offcuts, so I had a number of different sizes, thicknesses, and I ended up spending about 90 minutes hand planing them down to the right dimensions. Why? I've got no idea. I am still finding shavings 2 weeks later. It would be far easier to iron on edge banding or just add a simple round over to the ply itself. But if you do what I've done, use loads of blue tape to hold the hardwood edge banding in place while the glue cures, give it a slight stretch before sticking it down and it will hold it tight. The inside face is the hardest to get a hand plane on, so I generally try to get this flush and then trim the outer face after. Slight chamfers will knock down the sharp edges and then you're ready to sand. Remember that CA glue activator trick? Well, I'm beginning to think that it is responsible for getting me through most of this build. This time, I'm using it for the drawer handles, locking them in place so I can drill and screw through from the back. It is a hack that makes this build so much easier. If you're short of clamps or just need to have both hands free, then it's absolutely perfect. Honestly, CA glue has got hundreds of use within a workshop. It may seem like you're adding cost to a project by using it, but it is honestly a tiny price to pay for the level of help it actually gives you. And now a quick check to see if everything fits. If you've gotten this far in the video, first of all, can I just say thank you. I talk a lot, and honestly, this build is not the best filming I've done. But hopefully by now you've gained enough value from this video to offer up a like or a subscribe. If not, please keep watching because I've got one last hack to show you how to maximize the use of your small drawers. You see, before I made these drawers, I actually knew exactly what I wanted to put in them. Firstly, and mainly, these brushes. They are excellent for oil-based finishes, and so I generally keep quite a few of them around to hand. They were going to be in the base of both drawers, but in trying to add extra storage, I ruined the fit of the first drawer by adding these interior supports. So, for the second drawer, I've just used a few offcuts of sapele instead for support so as not to take up too much room. I did this because I've made some super simple trays to double the usage of the space. And now look just how much you can fit into these relatively small drawers. The trays, they were easy. Simple butt joints, 6mm ply base, all of it just sanded flush. Just cut your dados before assembly so you can have these simple dividers. And it really is that simple. And here's a brilliant coincidence. I made a fence extension for my table saw just a week after this project, and without trying, it fits like a glove in the long jig space. You can't plan for that kind of luck. Here's one final tip. I was forced through design to make the top tray of the brush drawer a little shorter, and I have to say that this was the better design of the two. Not only can you take it out one-handed, but you can actually do it while the drawer is only partially pulled out, which is probably what will happen the majority of the time. So if you have a choice, that's the best way to go. And so let's talk mistakes. There's loads in this build, there always are. And also, I think it's important to mention build time. This 20-minute video that you've just watched was probably around 2 days of solid building time. But in truth, timescale is really not that important. What is important is you take whatever time you need to do the build comfortably and enjoy the process. Mistakes. I've made a few. First mistake, let's talk the hardwood edge banding. I didn't leave the glue to cure anywhere near long enough. And so when I removed a lot of the tape, there's not actually that great a glue line. Not to mention the fact that a lot of the trim doesn't actually meet properly. There's gaps, and despite all that hand planing, it's still not perfect. I didn't show you how I put the surround on the top, and in truth, all it is wood screwed onto the top with a little bit of glue. If your top's flush, it's going to sit a lot better than mine does. But it is really just there to stop things falling off. And finally, let's talk the overall design. I thought the overall build would be too big for my workshop, and in fact, it's actually quite small compared to the space I've got. The fact that the table saw fence extension fits in perfectly is great, but now I've taken up all the jig space I've got within this cabinet. So, have I got the design right? Well, that depends on what jigs I make next. But if I could give you any advice from someone who's already made it, I'd leave yourself room for 2 more of the smaller jigs and 1 or 2 of the larger ones, just because we're always going to be making jigs. I really hope that first you've enjoyed the video, and second, if you are going to have a go at a build like this, I hope that there's enough in there that's going to spur you on, inspire you, and help you with some of the mistakes to avoid. I'd like to leave you with one unimportant thought at the end of all of this, and that is, this is shop furniture. This is where you cut your teeth. This is where you practice your skills. The one thing it shouldn't be is stressful or demanding, and if it does a job, then you should be very proud of your results. But in the end, whatever you decide to build today, this weekend, or this week, I hope you enjoy the process no matter the result, because that is important. If you've liked the video, please consider giving me a like and subscribe. If by any chance you haven't seen the original chest of drawers build, I'll pop it up there. If not that one, then YouTube's chosen that one for you. If you click either of them, I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching.